Thank you all so much for coming this afternoon. I'm sorry we're having to do this on a yucky, rainy day after lunch when everybody's down to be sleepy, but I'm happy to see everybody. My name is April Vickers, and I'm part of our Lincoln County's counseling team. I'm our SEB person, social emotional behavioral person, mostly in the elementary schools. So some of you in middle school and high school, you may not have seen me as much, but I know all of our elementary people have seen me in and out of their buildings and running around. So usually this is done with my three people, but today you get just me. So all right, how do I make this go? You go the oh, there we go. All right. So the Virginia Threat Assessment Model, or they also call it the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guides, was developed by Dewey Cornell. And he is right now a professor of education at the Curry School of Education at the University of Virginia. He spent most of his years before he became a professor working in forensic clinical psychology, specializing in violent offenders. So he spent a lot of time talking to folks in prisons and noticed that a lot of these people have an early background of having difficulties in school and issues with behavior or being in disciplinary trouble while they're at school. So he studied youth violence specifically for about 30 years. He's written several publications. They've got a lovely website that's part of the University of Virginia. The website is later on in the PowerPoint. That's where you can go and you can download that whole little packet that I've given you that's got all the forms in it for free as a PDF that you can go in. You can type into it if you don't want to handwrite things, and you can modify if you need to. So his assessment was developed in 2001. It's gone through one revision. So the one that we're looking at is the newest one. This one has 5 steps. The old one has 7. All right. So why do we use this particular version of a threat assessment model? So this one is the only one that we know of right now that has been accepted as evidence-based. So it's gone through lots of trials, through tests, field tests, through controlled studies, and it was registered in 2013 as part of the National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices. So there's a lot of research, a lot of evidence behind this particular model, showing that it is effective, that it does help, it does work at preventing violence in schools. And so that's why we chose to use this specific model. Okay, so why do we do it at all, right? Okay, so to provide practical guidelines for school-based teams to conduct threat assessments of students and other individuals who threaten to commit acts of violence. So what we're looking at is trying to prevent things before they happen, right? We hear, unfortunately, more often than not anymore, kids in schools having difficulties and resorting to acts of violence, threats of violence, when they get frustrated, when they feel mad, when they feel bullied, when things aren't the way they need to and they don't know how to express themselves, right? So we want to make sure that we are providing kids supports and interventions before it gets to a place where they feel they don't have any other options. Okay. All right. So a lot of schools in the past, instead of working with like threat assessment models, have used either a zero tolerance type policy or just suspended kids that make threats or have behavioral issues. And we found out that that really doesn't work. You think about your kids that get suspended a lot. Usually it has a whole lot more of a negative effect on their kiddos than it does a positive effect, right? They fall behind in their classes. They're not really there to receive their instruction. Usually these are some of our kiddos that struggle in classes anyway and can't really afford to spend the time outside of class. They feel alienated and rejected from their peers, which complicates matters for them already. They usually already feel this way from the get-go. They continue to behave and continue to get suspended. Usually we have our repeat offenders, right? And sometimes they learn, well, if I say certain things or I do certain things, I don't have to come to school for 3 days, right? And so sometimes it ends up being a reward instead of a punishment, okay? A lot of times our kiddos that continue to have difficulties or struggle, they'll just go right ahead and drop out of school. They're involved with the court system. They're involved with our juvenile justice services. And a lot of times it just fuels that school to prison pipeline, which was what Dewey Cornell kind of studied more later. That pattern between difficulties with behaviors and getting along with peers and things like that in the school, and then that overlapping into their adult life, where then we do these same behaviors as 18, 19, and we end up in jail. All right, so what exactly is a threat? So a threat is an expression of intent to harm someone. So threats can be spoken, written, or gestured. I could come up to Katina and say, Katina, I'm just going to kill you, right? I could look at her and do this or something like that, right? Or I could write it on a piece of paper. I could draw it, or anything like that. They can be direct or indirect, and we're going to look specifically at what constitutes a direct threat or an indirect threat. And they don't have to be absolutely communicated to the victim. I could not tell Katina and tell Cindy that I'm going to go beat Katina up later after school, you know. So it could be like that also. If we find a kiddo that has a weapon on them in their possession, we're going to assume that there was some kind of threat intended with that, unless it's just clear that it wasn't. So if we've got a kiddo that has a gun in their backpack or big knife, unless there's a super good reason, which I can't think of one off the top of my head, that they would have that at school, we're going to assume that that was there with the intent to harm somebody. So if at all there is any doubt whether something is a threat or not, we're just going to go ahead and treat it as if it's one. Okay. All right. So like I said, they can be direct, indirect, or applied. So direct is them frankly stating the intent, I'm going to beat you up, I want to kill you, I'm going to do this, that, whatever. Indirect is telling somebody else. So it's going to they're going to their friend and they said, this is what I'm going to do. And the friend reports it to you, or somebody who's maybe listening to the conversation reports it to you. Or there can be implied. You better watch out. You better be careful of going outside. Things like that, where the intent is there. It's just not maybe implicitly stated what the exact threat might be. Okay. All right. So our threat assessments are problem-solving approaches to prevention that involve assessment intervention with students who have threatened violence in some way. So we want to get to our kiddos before any actual event has happened, right? We want to make sure that we can put things in place to help it from getting to that point. If our kiddos need services, that we're there to plug them in, we're there to support them, we're there to give them reassurance. We want to make sure that we are putting things in place before it gets to the point where they feel that they're stuck in a place where they might need to use violence as a reaction. Okay. All right. So a threat could take place toward other students. They could threaten a staff member at a building or an event. So this could take place between a group of kids. It could be a student telling a teacher that they're going to kill them or hurt them in some way. We've done threat assessments on kiddos who have done that before. It could be a student who has threatened a building, like a bomb threat of some sort, or that they're going to ram their car in the building or something like that. It could be like that. Or an event, like something's going to happen at a basketball game, something's going to happen at a football game, or maybe like field trip, something like that. So it could be any of those things. Okay. So our goals of our threat assessments is to prevent violence, but we want to really focus on resolving conflicts or problems that underlie the threatening behavior. Because obviously when a kid gets to a point where they feel like they need to threaten violence, there's something going on, right? Yeah. Something's going on. Somebody's angry. Somebody's upset about something. What is it? Is it something that we can work with them here at school? Do they need higher services? What can we do to work with them to get them to a place where they feel like they're supported and they're safe here at school? So what we want to do is focus on identifying issues, evaluating them, seeing like what kind of services that we can offer them, what there is out there for them, and putting those interventions in place and making sure that we're monitoring our kiddos while they're here at school. Anybody got any questions so far? Statements? Questions? Oh, you aren't be super quiet, are you? All right. Okay, so there's two main types of threats that are identified with this model. So if you look in the front of your big thick packet, you will find first is the little questionnaire sheet that comes right off the PDF that you download when you do this. But after that front page, there is this lovely little decision-making tree, okay? And it breaks down our threats into two different kinds of threats. The first one is a transient threat. The transient threats are described as statements that do not express a lasting intent to harm someone, okay? Transient threats are either identified as figures of speech or reflect feelings that dissipate in a short period when the student thinks about the meanings of what he or she has said. All transient threats end in an apology or an explanation that makes it clear that the threat is over or doesn't exist. So a transient threat are going to be those things that kiddos do impulsively. Okay, so little Johnny gets mad at little Billy because he took his ball away from him at the playground and says he's going to beat him up. Does he really mean it, or was he just angry at the time? It all depends on if the student feels like he's some sort of like remorse for what they did, and they're willing to make some sort of amend for it. If he feels bad for what he said, oh, I was really mad at the time, I don't mean it. If there was a prior issue between the two of them, maybe it's something ongoing. But if it's two kiddos, for the most part, that seem to get along pretty well, and it was something that was just done out of anger or out of spontaneity, usually it's going to fall on this level of transient. Okay, which means that there was an actual threat presented, something did happen, but was there any real intent to follow up with it? Okay, the next one is substantive. And substantive threats are defined as statements that express a continuing intent to harm someone. They may express emotions like the transient threats, but they also indicate a desire to harm someone that extends beyond the immediate incident or argument when the threat was made. They have more of a substance to them. Okay, so these are threats where there's actually something behind those words. It wasn't just something that was said in a minute of anger, or something that just popped in their head at the time. These are things that maybe have a little bit of history back behind them, okay? So maybe little Johnny and little Billy really have had issues all year at school. And maybe it's just accumulated to this one moment. He really means that he wants to do something to this other kiddo, right? So there is an actual desire to harm at that point, okay? And then a little bit later in our training, we're going to look at two different kinds of substantive threats. But for the most part, we have our threats that are, for the most part, just done impulsively, and then we have ones that maybe actually have some meat on their bones and something might actually happen. Okay. All right, so here's kind of the continuum. All right, so at the bottom we have our transient threats. Like I said, those could be figures of speech. I mean, I'm sure we've all heard kiddos say, I'm going to hit you in the nose. Or, just talking to their friends or joking like that. We've all heard kiddos make statements like that, right? Jokes, funny songs, fleeting expressions of anger. They might be mad 1 minute and say they're going to beat each other up, and then 2 minutes later, they're best buds, right? So all of those things are kind of transient types of threats. Then you get into, we've got kiddos that are looking for a little attention, right? Like they could be fun to upset science class or, get a rise out of somebody out on the playground. Then we've got some that just want to brag about what they can do, right? So we've got threats like that, but without any real intent to harm. If we're just running our mouth, that's still not going to really constitute as anything more than a transient threat. Okay, then we have our possible substantive. So we have attempts to intimidate or frighten. You all see kids do this? They just want to freak somebody out. Yeah. Sometimes we just feel like we want to get under somebody's skin. And we have a lot of kiddos that do that. More than often, a lot of them fall in these ranges, right? So we have somebody that maybe does have some anger, some issues, a little bit of history, but we want to try to scare somebody else, or we want to try to feel big at the moment. So we use our words or our gestures or our manners to make somebody else feel scared. So that is a possible substantive. There is the possibility that it could become more than a transient threat, so it might merit some watching, right? Okay. And then we have substantive threats, which warn of impending violence, right? The intent is there. The kiddo has verbalized or at least expressed some sort of desire to want to harm somebody else. And it's definitely a substantive at that time that we want to pay attention to. Any questions on those? Okay. All right. How many of y'all tired of looking at pyramid things at school? All right. So just like in everything else we do at school, we also have in our psychology area our lovely 3 tiers of prevention in schools, right? So just like RTI and everything else, we have different levels of supports that we offer kids as far as kids with mental health issues here at school, or kids that might need some sort of support as far as counseling or mentoring or that kind of thing. All right, so we all know that our lovely tier 1 is everybody gets the same thing, right? Everybody's provided the same services. Then we have our at-risk students and our intensive interventions for our higher risk students. So just off the top of my head, this is what I could think of as far as a lot of tier 1 supports that are offered school-wide, right? For the most part, a lot of our schools will do some sort of PBIS system, right? I think, does everybody in school, for the most part, do some sort of PBIS? Okay. So usually when you're doing PBIS, you have to have clear directions. There's a real specific set of instructions you're following and discipline kind of referrals, things like that. We do have our fabulous SROs that come to our schools, right? They're really awesome about talking to our kiddos, developing relationships. They're also there for our safety. I know a lot of our awesome school counselors do their classroom guidance. They'll offer lessons on bullying. I know they just did that not too long ago. They'll talk to our kids about drugs, all kinds of awesome stuff. Character development curriculum. I know a lot of them are using second steps. I know you all are doing something at the middle school. I can't remember what it's called. What is it?
In control.
In control. I think the high school does something too, a different kind of program. I can't remember.
And do you?
Yeah, okay. I knew it was something. I just couldn't remember. Right. Some schools offer conflict resolution for peer disputes. You know, sometimes counselors will bring in groups of kids if they're having issues and try to kind of make sure everybody feels a part of making sure things are resolved. And then, of course, we do our TELOB screening data for each school at least 3 times a year. So these are things that we do to kind of keep track of all of our kiddos. So we've kind of got our eye on all of them. Does anybody's school do something else? Or maybe more? Y'all aren't going to talk to me at all? All right. So then, of course, here too is our at-risk kiddos. And then you get things like social skills groups, which our counselors do. They'll pull in small groups, right, and work on a variety of topics, anxiety, worry, social skills. I also this year am doing a lot of tier 2 interventions. I'm at each elementary school a day a week. I pull and do a Mind Up, which is like a mindfulness curriculum at each elementary school. So I do part of that too. That's not something for all of our kiddos, but it is ones for the ones our counselors have sent to me for small groups. Our counselors provide short-term counseling for kiddos that might need it. We have awesome after-school programs that offer like mentoring and peer tutoring and supports for our kiddos. We have our special education team, which works with our special needs kiddos that provide extra support and services for those kids. Anybody else think of any other tier 2 interventions their schools offer? Maybe I should you all talk first before I do mine.
I said most every school does check-in, check-out.
Oh, I missed that one. Check-in, check-out. Right, so that's a good one. Not offered to all of our kiddos, but kiddos that might need a little bit of extra love in the morning and in the afternoon to keep them on track. I'll have to add that one, Tracy. All right, and then tier 3, our most at-risk kiddos, right? Usually they're the kiddos that we've got our eyes on. I know I'm talking to mostly a room full of counselors. Those are the kiddos you know, the ones your eyes go to in the morning. Is he here? What's he doing? Who's he talking to? The ones that we're watching, right? Ongoing counseling. These may be kiddos that have outside services. Maybe we're working with DCBS with them. Maybe they've got somebody that comes in. Maybe they've got case managers. We've got kiddos that sometimes have alternative placements, right? We do have some behavior support classrooms. We have kiddos that utilize those sort of resources for additional help. And then we have kiddos that receive even more specialized special education services. Anything else you all can think of in tier 3? Y'all are killing me. All right. So how do you decide? For the most part, if the threat's transient, it's not going to be a big deal. This is something that we're going to be easily and quickly able to resolve by either talking with the kiddos, getting them together, see what was going on. Are they able to work it out? Either by themselves, a lot of times they can, or with a little bit of peer help. If it can't be resolved quickly, and it's something that you're going to have to spend a lot of time on, it's going to automatically be substandard. Okay. Okay. All right. So at each school in the district, we have threat assessment teams. All right. And so what our threat assessment teams are just a group of our folks that work at our schools that convene to identify, evaluate, and address threats or potential threats to school security. What our threat assessment teams do is they interview their kiddos that have either made threats or are witnesses or targets. They're talking to teachers. We're trying to figure out what's going on so that we can best meet the needs of our students. So for the most part, if you're here, you're on your school's threat assessment team, right? Yeah? Okay. So for the most part, who's on it? Well, we always defer to our principal or our assistant principal. They're always who leads our team. They're kind of our director, right? We have our school resource officers, our SOs. They may not always be involved unless a threat gets to a substantive kind of threat. But our school resource officers are always really awesome to help us work with kiddos, even kiddos that may not be kiddos making substantive threats, but just need a little extra support. We have our mental health staff at our schools, and they conduct our mental health assessments if one is needed when we're doing these assessments. And a lot of times, these are the people that the threats are reported to. So I know a lot of times when a principal or assistant principal might get a threat, a lot of times they'll go directly to our school counselors with, hey, this has happened. Can you kind of figure out what's happening? So a lot of times they'll also kind of be like a co-leader on the team, try to get that process started. A lot of times too, these will be the people who will do safety plans with our kiddos, re-entry plans if our kiddos have had to go out for some reason, then come back in. They may not always be the ones who are going to be monitoring the kiddos, but they will be the ones who are kind of like setting up the plans for them to come back and making sure that they know, okay, if you don't feel safe or there's something going on here, the steps that you do. There also are folks that will make referrals. If we have kiddos that might need hospitalization or might need to be emergency assessed by a counselor, and we don't have one here available, then a lot of times they're going to be the people that are reaching out to outside services to set that stuff up. And then we also have our other team members, and that's really anybody at school that has been trained to do the assessments. So that could be our custodians, that could be our teachers, that could be our cafeteria staff, anybody that's interested and that wants to be a part, right? But really all of our school members need to know that if they hear kids make threats or they see things, that they absolutely need to report it to somebody who can follow up. Okay. All right. All right. So just take a minute. I think everybody's kind of sitting kind of close to their team members from each one of their school. Just talk for a second amongst yourselves and identify who is on your school's threat assessment team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who does your office?
Preston is mostly involved.
Have you all had a lot?
This is only the first one that No, I don't think they've done it.
It's legal, like,
Well, they've done a couple because we've sent some outside.
We're,
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they're way better than the
Yeah,
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 well.
yeah, like, we're getting
Okay.
both, yeah. We're getting both this year.
All right, guys, so for the most part, do people feel like they kind of know who's on their team, who to reach out for help if they need it? All right. We always want to make sure that this is a team effort. Nobody completes a risk assessment alone. Tracy's very adamant about that because nobody wants the sheer responsibility of being the sole person that says, well, this kid he's got to go. There's something going on, right? We want to make sure that we've got more than one person. That way, everybody feels supported in decisions. And, who likes to make decisions like that alone? I know I wouldn't. I'd rather have somebody there to help out and to talk to about those kind of things. Okay. All right. So again, this is kind of recap. So our different threats: substantive, which means does not express a lasting intent to harm someone. Serious substantive, which is a threat to fight, hit, or beat up. And very serious substantive, which is a threat to kill, rape, or cause very serious injury with a weapon. Now, these all come straight off of the lovely decision-making tree that I gave you at the beginning. So, I mean, if you're all in any question at all, this is an absolutely wonderful thing to refer back to. It kind of leads you right along the same way. So I have a couple of scenarios, and I want to see if you all can tell what kind of threat it is. Okay? You have to talk to me. Okay. All right. So if I have a student who's angry and he says, I'm going to kill you, but once you talk to him, the student describes no plan to harm and agrees to apologize to the other kiddo. What kind of threat is that? Absolutely. Why?
It's not, it's not.
There was no real lasting intent. It was fairly impulsive. Yes, and remorse. He's willing to apologize. All right. So two students get into an argument and one punches the other. On the interview, this kid says that he shouldn't have lost his temper, but he felt like he punched the other kid in self-defense. I swear this isn't my paper, but they tried to trick you.
Yes. Transient.
There's no real threat
Yeah,
in
it
this
was,
case,
it was the.
right? So our threat
Yeah.
assessments are to prevent violence. In this case, this has kind of already happened, so there's really nothing that we can do to stop it. So there's no real threat at this point. The kid is remorseful. He does agree that he shouldn't have done it, but probably this is a straight referral to the principal for some sort of behavioral or disciplinary consequence, right? It wouldn't really do us any good to do a threat assessment at this point unless he expresses a desire to continue to want to do it in the future. Okay. All right. So number 3, a student tells a friend that he will beat up someone in the parking lot after school. On interview, student is sullen and uncooperative.
It's serious.
Absolutely. So again, we're talking about a threat to beat up someone. If our kiddos, we get them in there and we're trying to talk to them, trying to figure out what's going on, and they refuse to cooperate, that's an automatic. Yeah, that's an automatic red flag. If they're not willing to talk to you, take it seriously, then we automatically say, all right, you've got to talk to somebody a little bit more official than me because this isn't working. Okay, so absolutely, this is a serious substandard. All right, a student is found with a list of students under the heading scheduled to die. Student is sullen and uncooperative. Interviewer does not believe the student was joking or simply trying to get attention. What kind of
Very serious.
Okay, why? Uncooperative. What else? Absolutely. So then we've got the threat to kill, right? Okay. All right. A student with a history of fighting draws up a list of students to beat up. On interview, student describes feeling angry at peers, perceives them as laughing at him at all times. What kind of threat? Absolutely. Why? Absolutely.
Was it sorry?
Yeah, expresses no remorse. All All right. A student tells two friends she's going to stab another student. On interview, the student says, well, she deserves it.
Very
Very
serious.
serious.
Absolutely. Again, we've got that threat to kill, no remorse.
Yes.
She feels justified, obviously, in her choice of actions. So that's
Yeah, the
serious.
weapon. Well,
Absolutely. We brought in
the weapon.
a weapon or mentioned having one anyway. All right. A student says he's going to sodomize another student in the bathroom. On interview, the student is defiant and said it's none of the school's business.
Very serious.
Absolutely. Wow.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've got the threat to rape. We're cooperative. We're not showing any kind of remorse. A student says she's going to break both legs of a student that beat her in a race. On interview, student contends she was just joking. That's just how we talk, and we were all laughing. Transient, right? So there was a statement made that said that she was going to do something to harm somebody, but it was either joking, a figure of speech. They weren't really serious about it, and she obviously didn't consider it as a serious statement on her part either at the time. So that's right, it's transient. A student calls in a bomb threat. No bomb is found, and he knows nothing about bombs. On interview, student explains he just wanted to see what would happen. I was just joking. What kind of threat?
Transient, but he's in trouble.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So it's transient. Why is it transient?
Because there was never,
There was no
Yeah,
real intent to
yeah.
harm, right? So anytime a kiddo makes a threat, even if it's transient, that doesn't automatically mean we're off the hook with an apology and an I'm sorry, Betty, right? Sometimes, especially if they did something like that, you're absolutely right. They would be in some big trouble. There would be some serious consequences, right? So just because a threat is transient and we don't go any further in our assessment doesn't mean that they're not referred for some possibly heavy disciplinary issues or even charges if that were to come to it. All right, number 10, a student screams obscene insults at a teacher, storms out of the classroom. The student says the teacher just isn't fair.
transient, there was no threat made.
What?
Transient, because there was no threat made.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no threat, right? Just getting mad and yelling obscene words at our teacher. That's not really a threat unless we make some sort of statement, gesture that we are intending to hurt someone. Just calling someone a bad name, storming out of class, having a tantrum, not really a threat. Y'all are good. All right. So again, a threat assessment is not designed to determine whether a student has made a threat, though, but whether the student poses a threat. Okay. Obviously, if they get to you, they probably said something they shouldn't have, but do they really mean it? Okay. This also, I'm not 100% sure, Tracy. I know we used to go off campus and do some of these. If threats are made off school grounds, a lot of times we do go ahead and talk to our kiddos when they return to school and do assessments. I know sometimes we've had kiddos that have not been at school and we've had reports made that they have said things that they shouldn't. And we've either tried to get a hold of their parents to bring them in or tried to get a hold of them the next day.
Like recently, we've had a more serious one, and we said they had to have an outside person because it was beyond. We had already deemed, yes, it was a threat. Somebody else needs to intervene now and say what needs to happen to the kid. So I think it probably depends on the situation a little bit too.
Right. I know I know teachers are never off duty and you get reported lots of things that kids do on social media or things that happen at football games or over the weekend. And a lot of times those are waiting for you on Monday morning when you come in and you have to deal with those things too. All right. So again, it's not fun when our kids do that, but just screaming or having a tantrum is not a threat. If the kid's having a throwdown and he's trying to kick and he's yelling every cuss word he knows, that's still not really a threat unless he makes some sort of statement or gesture that he wants to hurt somebody. So calling your teacher a name, it's not nice, but it's not really a threat. Okay. All right. So our threat assessment is a prevention strategy. Our first thing we want to do is identification, right? Sometimes we have our kiddos, their friends come up and talk to us. They're worried about their friends. They know things are happening. They know tons of things. We have no clue that they know, right? So a lot of times we get our information about who we need to talk to from their friends. Sometimes we have family members of our kiddos that call in and they're concerned, right? Their mom and dad are worried about them. They're not talking at home. They're not participating with their family, and they've got concerns. Sometimes we just have community members that are worried about kiddos too, and they may call and want to know, if we could talk to kids and see, if we could find out anything's going on. And then we have our threat assessment teams that actually do the evaluation to figure out whether or not our threats are serious. And then interventions. And the interventions are something that the team decides on, okay, based on whether or not the threat is substantive or transient. What kind of things do we need to do to address whatever issue or need is presented to us? Or maybe even in the most serious cases, what kind of protective actions do we need to take? Okay, so this is a thing we get a lot, is the difference between what is a risk assessment versus what is a threat assessment. Okay, so our school counselors do both of these. A risk assessment is the form that we use and the assessment we do when there's the intent to self-harm. So that's when we've got kiddos that are talking about cutting or suicidal ideation or plans to commit suicide. Okay, so that is harm to themselves. And that's a completely, well, not a completely different process, but it's a different process that we go through when we are looking at kiddos who are expressing some sort of intent to self-harm. Okay, so our threat assessments are when we're thinking about harming somebody else. Okay, so like we said, these are other kids, staff, events, buildings, things like that. Of course, either one of these things, we want to make sure that we are always reporting to somebody. If we hear kids that are talking about wanting to self-harm, cut, maybe plans to harm themselves in any way, we want to make sure we're reporting that also to our counselors or to our principals, as well as any mention that our kiddos may make that they want to harm somebody else. Okay. All right. So again, we're looking at trying to keep something happening, right? It's a whole lot easier to keep it from happening than trying to fix things when they do happen. Okay. All right. So school shootings, they seem unpredictable, but prevention doesn't require prediction. All right. We did a couple of us went to a really awesome training that was done by either FBI or the Secret Service. I can't remember. Was it the Secret Service? And they talked about actually trying to profile school shooters and that there wasn't really anything that they could identify as being a typical school shooter. That it was a diverse group of kids, ages, socioeconomic statuses, ethnicities, just they couldn't pinpoint any specific typical kiddo that is the typical form for a school shooter. So this is why we have rules and guidelines and policies in place, right? It's kind of like when you're driving, the rules of the road, right? And they're to keep everybody safe because we don't know who's going to have an accident, right? We don't know maybe who's struggling all the time. But if we have those things in place, then we're better able to know what to do when those situations do pop up where we might have to actually go into action. Any questions so far? Any statements? Anything you want to share? No? All right, so using our policy and our threat assessment guidelines, they avoid a couple of things, like overreaction. Like we talked about our zero tolerance policies, right? That really aren't good for catching the kiddos that we really actually do need to keep our eye on, right? So we have our little friend here. He was suspended in Maryland from his school because he chewed his Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun. All right. We don't want to be like that, right? We don't want to send little Josh home because he ate his Pop-Tart to look like a gun when little Josh needs to be learning how to add in first grade math, right? We also don't want to underreact. We don't want to say, oh, you know, he's a really good kid. He comes from a really good family. It's probably okay that he has that hunting knife in his backpack. He probably just forgot it over the weekend. You know, we don't want to do either one of those things, right? Okay. All right. So now it is time for a little activity. Yay, right? Yay. Okay. All right. So you have a form, a little story. It's called Missed Opportunity. Okay. All right. And in this is about a young man named Michael. And this is a little bit of what goes on in Michael's life. He has a hard time. There's some things that are going on. All right. So what I want you to do is I want you to take a few minutes. I want you to kind of read through what's going through on here. I want you to read through once, and then I want you to go back through and see if there are any red flags, any things you think that people should have noticed or maybe picked up on that were going on in this young man's life. Things that maybe should have been brought to somebody's attention, maybe things that should have been acted on. as y'all are getting done, if you wanna run to the bathroom or throw things away or get up and stretch your legs for about 5 minutes or so, please don't hesitate.
Oh, there you go. I guess this is and for your mom. So, yeah.
Are you reading when I'm ready?
Yeah. I couldn't, maybe somebody out there could. You see how it would be hard to replace something like that because it's sewn into actual fabric. It can be replaced. So when is Suzanne going back to school? Have you talked to her or anything? She said how she should go. Yeah. Be careful.
Everything turned out okay?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Excuse me. Oh, Lord. This was my little dream. It's from something.
Ready for Christmas breakfast?
I ain't even started.
No, I've barely started.
I bought
this
one
week.
Christmas present.
Yeah, same, yeah. Didn't want a whole lot, but they're older, but. Oh, yeah. I got a list, doesn't she?
Yes, she did. She wants a baby boy.
What she want? Ah.
She thinks it sounds like
Oh. Oh. I like Popeye. They want to be found.
Look at this.
So, yeah. Yeah. I drove. But.
Yeah.
Because of the delay.
Yeah. Look at these copies and they had to make that right there.
I know.
I've looked too.
Apparently her email is.
Don't mind telling us. I can tell you things. Okay, you know. Oh, yeah, I can figure that out.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Over these kids and win.
Somebody
Oh,
just
me
said,
too. Me
I
too.
just logged in
Perfectly.
Yeah.
Mess up one number.
That's one little thing, or don't type in their email right.
They can't try it again.
So then they go complain about it. And then the teacher calls me or texts me and says, I can't get in. And then I'm like, I got in just fine.
Yeah.
Or I go to,
Doing something
or
right.
I go to their room and have all the benches fine.
We tried.
Yeah.
Sure you did.
Yeah.
Okay. I believe that. Oh, I got ACT this weekend. Yeah. But I need to be working on.
Yeah.
I wanted that,
She's like, no.
Yeah, I don't think, so most of them, they do have one, like, there's not one. Yeah. You're fine. You're ready.
You ready?
You really are.
Oh, really?
You're fine. My type is fine in April.
Oh, that was great.
Yeah, hot mess, yeah. A hot mess, yeah.
Of course, she's the one that runs around in the cafeteria.
No, you're good.
So today I got.
I see you get there.
I know, I have to get mine.
They always have to see the last one.
Yeah, I've never met with her, but I know exactly. So she has like a bomb.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you will probably have a.
About
The first letter, the first name, last name. It's 6-digit birthday. First letter, the first and last name, and then her 6-digit birthday.
You're gonna go there.
oh, yeah.
Let's do that.
yeah, I know exactly. I've never met with her.
As soon as you see that picture, you'll know who she is.
Oh, Charlotte.
Probably drive like.
Look, you're the child. Yeah. I'm not reckoning else like one.
So funny that she
But she said she's not getting here. The only action. Right, it's not I said, State Erie, and then also in Iverson, so he's already in Iverson. That doesn't work out.
Is there any chocolate in here? I gotta have something. I'm getting tired. I eat heavy. When I eat heavy, I get tired. I get burgers.
Yeah.
Here's my dogo.
You get all the chocolate.
Not all of it, but I got some. Give me a little bit of goddamn.
Oh, really?
All right, I think everybody's about done. Does anybody need more time, or are we good? Yeah. First off, does anybody know who this is? This is a real life, true life story. Does anybody know who this is right off the bat? No? Okay. So this is actually Michael Carneal, who is the young man who December 1st, 1997, so this has been a while back, shot and killed 3 students and injured 5 back at Heath High School in Paducah. So this is actually several things that had happened to him. I looked it up this morning. I wasn't for sure. He still is incarcerated for this. So in the events that had happened to him leading up to the day that he did open fire on his fellow students at Heath High School, there were lots of things that happened to him, lots of things that were missed opportunities for maybe somebody to step in and maybe make a difference or change the path that he was on. What are some things that you all noticed? What are some things that you all underlined that were either red flags or maybe some situations where somebody could have stepped in and maybe changed things?
I think at the very beginning of the bullying in the school system, the school should have stepped in that area. The very beginning where he was teased.
Okay.
And that rumor page should have been shut down quickly.
Absolutely. That we would like to think that would not fly today, but they actually did have a real school newspaper back in '97, and that actually did publish things about their kids' sexual preferences and bullying and making fun of some of their students. Absolutely. What else do you all see?
When he withdrew from his old friends.
Right. Right. We saw on that one slide right at the beginning, we talked about our kids feeling rejected and alienated, how sometimes they feel even more that way. And I think the more they feel pushed away, the more like desperate they get. Don't you all? Like for any kind of connection. And a lot of times when our kiddos get like that, they'll attach to anybody they can, whether it's a good influence or a bad influence. What else?
He's having paranoid delusions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
History of mental illness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was actually evaluated by Dr. Cornell. This is one of the offenders that Dr. Cornell did talk to in some of his studies. This young man, I guess he's older than me, but he has a diagnosis of schizophrenia and dysthymia, which is kind of like a milder kind of version of depression, right here, and kind of a bit longer lasting. Kind of. So he does have delusions, hallucinations, probably on some pretty heavy meds. What else? I was always amazed that his parents didn't even know the family history of the things that had happened, right? They didn't know. Could they have gotten help? Well, they didn't know if this was something that was typical. You know, a lot of our families are embarrassed sometimes. There's still a lot of a stigma attached to mental health services, having medication for mental health issues. We have a lot of families that are not willing to involve maybe counselors or outside agencies. They're afraid that all that counselors are going to do are try to take their kids away or get them sent to prison, right? We have a lot of people that still feel that way.
Is it typical for a student that has the intention of harming others in the school system to warn those students? Is that typical?
Sometimes it is, yeah. Yeah. I think there are a few different cases that I've read about where they have mentioned it or like posted things.
You know, that's what I've noticed probably the big thing was the fact that those warnings were made and you know, that's where we have to have those relationships with students so that they know that it's okay to come talk to folks and but they have so many more eyes and ears than we do. and they know things we don't know
Absolutely.
all the time.
Absolutely. What else specifically did you all see?
The band teacher allowing initiation.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
What about the gym teacher?
they're putting him with the girls
Mhm.
because of, yeah,
That was terrible.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of an act of degradation,
Mhm.
right? Trying to make him feel like he wasn't masculine enough to play with the boy team to make him play with the girls. All right. What about the influence of the media, even back in '97? Because it talked about him being particularly influenced by a film.
I'm watching the movie, the best,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the kid who was bullied,
Mm-hmm.
you know, made a plan to come back. Well, you know, had in his mind, he wanted to come back and get revenge.
Absolutely. I know it's something that when we do our training from that the police talk, which one is that one, Jeannie, that the police do? That we watched at the beginning of
They
the
have to
year.
notify,
It's.
they have to notify us.
Yes, we have to do it. It's one of those, but every year the same gentleman talks about the influence of social media, video games, movies, all of those things on our kiddos and how commonplace violence has gotten among our kiddos. About which one is that?
No.
I put you on the spot too, didn't I?
Where the police have to notify us, but I can't remember. It'll come to me.
But yeah, he talks a lot in that. It's one of the police detectives talks about the influence of violence. I think too, if your kid left the house carrying a great big sheeted thing, taking it to school, wouldn't you be a little curious? Yeah, but nobody
Yeah.
stopped him. Nobody asked what was in there.
I know, but look at that one that just happened. And the parents bought him that gun and, I mean, there were so many things
Absolutely.
that could have happened differently there. They knew.
Absolutely.
Sad.
Absolutely. And a lot of times with our kiddos, we do have red flags, things that pop up. And I know that at schools, there are a million and one things that we have to pay attention to. But sometimes we do have kiddos that are just kind of crying out for some sort of attention or somebody to just pay attention or to listen for a few minutes. And I know that we all know kids that have been picked on and have experienced some degree of feeling rejected or unwanted either at school or at home. And, you know, it's hard.
Handle with care.
Handle with care. Absolutely. Or handle with care. Yes, yes, thank you. That one. Okay. Absolutely. So, yes, with this young man, there were several times I think that there could have been some interventions put in place that maybe could have prevented what ended up happening. And like you were saying, I'm sure with what happened in Michigan, there were times that they obviously already had concerns about this young man, things that were going on.
Yeah, they met with him that day.
Yeah.
The school had met with him that day.
Yeah. We do things a little differently, not that I don't think anything could not ever happen here, but we do have, our policies and procedures are a little different. And I would tell you that if there were those concerns at our school with a kid having that kind of thing, I know they released him to go back, that we wouldn't have done that.
Well, I wonder, did they not, I guess they didn't search his stuff. Like, they didn't look through his stuff.
I-
To
it
make
doesn't
sure he
sound
didn't
like
have a
that.
I think-
gun. I mean,
most of our school staff that do these can tell you that when we do have a kiddo that we are seriously concerned about, they are monitored at all times and they don't leave unless they leave with somebody taking them home or like it's the SRO taking them home. Like that doesn't.
We had one at the high school this morning.
Do what?
We had one at the high school this morning. He was looking up there on his Chromebook. And so I sat in when Chloe did the.
Yeah.
Where it says that he just had to stay in he's in the office and went through all this stuff. Searched his body.
Yeah. I mean, it is a process and it does take a lot of time, but we would rather use that time and address whatever concerns and whatever issues there may be than, like I said, to underreact and say, oh, well, probably didn't mean anything by it and send a kiddo back. So, I mean, that's why we have our policies in place. That's why we train folks to make sure that we've got folks that are available, because you all know how busy you all are in your buildings. Sometimes it's whoever we can grab sometimes to do these things. Hey, can you sit in with me and, just talk to this kiddo with me?
And the reality of that is, in the rural community here, a lot of kids do have guns,
Well, it's a complete cultural thing. Like, right, we live in a culture that does hunting. We have archery teams at all of our schools, right? Our bow and arrow is technically a weapon. We can count that. I mean, lots of little boys pack pocket knives when I was in school. Actually, I was thinking the other day, I'm a former patriot myself. I think the guys used to come with guns and gun racks in the back of their trucks. We didn't think anything of it. Park right on the school lot. So, I mean, we do live in a culture where, I've had first graders, second graders come in over the weekend and talk about having gone hunting with their grandpa and shooting their rifles and things like that. And, you kind of have to take it in the context. And that's why I like that we do this instead of, oh, you said the word gun, you're going home. Well, okay, so you went hunting with your grandpa. That's awesome. I'm glad you had a good time with your grandpa. But maybe we don't need to bring up guns in school because it makes some people uncomfortable. Like that kind of thing. We're not, kind of punishing the kiddo for something that's more of a cultural thing. But you're absolutely right. A lot of our kids do have access to them.
I'm surprised at how many kids in the last couple months have been threat assessments on, and if they even an intention of a gun or something, I ask, well, do you have access to a gun or sort of gun in your home? And say, yeah, and they'll say, is it locked up or can you reach it? Oh, we know where it is. It's in the closet. It's not locked up.
It's always in the closet.
But I know not to touch it. But,
it's always in the closet. I had a little kiddo tell me once, like, I don't feel comfortable telling you where it is. It's in the closet, isn't it? How'd you know that? It's always in the closet or on top of the bookshelf. But yeah, a lot of our kids do. They know where they are. They know what drawer they're in. Yeah, they do have that. Anybody have any more comments over Michael Cornell? I think when I looked, he is actually up for maybe parole next year. I'm not sure. I think 2022. Excited you all talk to me. All right. So I know you all get this a lot. Y'all are probably sick of this, our counseling folks. Bullying versus threatening, right? Everybody's bullying everybody. All right. So you all know the difference between bullying and threatening, right? So bullying is when you have two differing, different statuses, right, or strengths. When you've got an unequal matchup between two kids and it's persistent and it's ongoing, the same kid is picking on the other same kiddo time after time. They're targeting, this one is of a lesser, status than the other one. Okay. So I think sometimes that's important to point out too when we talk about that. Many threats involve bullying. We talked about, I think the first thing Kathy mentioned was the fact that Michael was bullied constantly and by kiddos that were in a higher position of power than him. All right. So if we have a conflict between equals, usually that's not something we consider bullying though, right? That's just something we usually have a lot of questions on when we talk about, we have certain kiddos that are bullied versus not. Does that make any sense? Yeah. Okay. All right. So again, bullying in high school, what we saw in our article part that we read, there was obviously what was posted in the school newspaper, completely inappropriate, completely mortified him. There wasn't anybody monitoring the restrooms where a lot of these things happen. I know at our high school, we do have folks that are trying to monitor the restrooms, watching out for kiddos. I'm pretty sure probably at the middle school you all do that too. Have folks out in the hallways, kind of trying to monitor, make sure that we keep an eyes on our kids in the hallways. Stuff in the classroom, poor kids couldn't eat lunch, stuff was taken. We've got band initiations, things going on in the classroom. Okay. And all of that led to other things that happen, right? Sometimes these things start slow and then snowball. All those things led to a change in his peer group, right? We talked about how he kind of was neglected by his old friends. He made new ones. He kind of made it an us versus them thing, right? The freaks versus the frets and us versus them. They are not like us, so we can't handle that. He wants to please his new friends, right? These kiddos are looking for some sort of acceptance from somebody. All right, and obviously, a quick mental deterioration. He started having the hallucinations, delusions, hearing the threatening voices. Okay. All right. So this is where it gets into what exactly is our county's policy for dealing with threats when they happen in schools. So you have in your handouts a copy straight from our counselor drive of our threat assessment policy. Okay, this lovely little Lincoln pears with the tree on it. Okay, so this is our county's policy on how we address threats. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through it kind of step by step, what we can do, and then we're actually going to go through a big chunk of the paperwork. Because I don't want to talk to you just about data and statistics. I want you all to be able to know what the forms look like, when to use them, how to use them. Okay, so the very first thing, we have a kiddo that has done something, said something, written something, and somebody gets wind of it. Whoever that person is, whether it is the principal themselves, whether it's teacher, whether it is custodian, they need to make sure that somebody's got eyes on that kid, right? A kid's not left alone. Okay? So if a friend of them, you're doing lunch duty, and a friend comes up and says, hey, he just said he wanted to kill this other kid. Well, he's coming with me, first off. Right? We secure our kiddo. That means that somebody's got eyes on him at all times. So that might mean that somebody brings them up to the counseling office and they have a seat. Somebody's got their eyes on them, or they go to the front office. I know that's what they do at Stanford. They'll sit somebody at the front office up at the with the secretary to kind of hang out with her for a minute. I'm sure you all kind of do things similar at your all schools for the most part. All right, but it's super important that we make sure that we are monitoring that kiddo at all times, right? Because there is that chance, we don't know yet, we haven't investigated, that there could be a substantive threat. Okay, so we want to make sure we secure the kiddo. If for some reason that the kiddo is not there, like they are absent that day, or we have had folks call us and say that a kiddo is home, it's going to go ahead and be reported to your school counselor. Okay, we have at times gone out to houses and talked to kids. We've completed risk assessments at the police station. We've done them at people's houses. We've done them just about everywhere you could think of. Okay, I mean, we will come to the kiddo if we need to. Okay, then you're going to notify your principal, because they are your team lead. They're the one that needs to know. And usually what the principal is going to do is pass that on to your counselor. So then the counselor is going to they're going to get together whatever team member is available, right? Because like I know Leslie's a teacher. She's in a classroom. She's got a schedule. She may not be available. So Mackenzie may call Kathy and say, Kathy, can you help me do this threat assessment? It could be your principal. I think everybody's principals, for the most part, are trained on doing threat assessments. Anybody in your building that's been trained that's available, you want to make sure you've got at least one other person with you when you are doing your assessment, okay? So then we're going to start right here at the beginning. That's why this little decision tree is the best thing ever, right? We start right at step one, okay? So we start with evaluating the threats, okay? All right. All right, we go through a whole section, and we're going to get to that in just a minute, but I want to make sure I go over the whole part of the policy with you first, okay? So we're going to use the assessment to gather the information that we need. And once we have the information that we feel that we need, then the teams can get together to make a determination on what interventions or what steps need to be taken next, okay? So these packets look enormously thick, and they are, but this doesn't mean that you're gonna use all of it, okay? Some of the ones that are transient may take about 6 of these pages, and that's it, and that's fine. If you don't need some of these other pages, you don't have to do them. They're just there in case you do need to do them, okay? Okay, so if a threat is transient and you feel like there hasn't been any actual intent to harm and that nobody is in any real danger, usually what happens is that it's then referred back to the principal. We let them know, hey, this came out as transient, and then see what they want to do as far as the kid making some sort of, what am I thinking of? What word? No. Resolution. It's kind of like resolution. Reparation? Is that the word I'm looking for?
That's the word I meant to say.
Okay, that's okay. We'll go with that then. Making, as far as the kid making some sort of reparation for their behavior, or whether they're going to get some sort of discipline action, right? If it is more substantive, you would still take it back to the principal, and probably at that point it would become a time for your counselor to get involved a little bit more. We're going to go into this a little bit more too, though. A little bit deeper, and possibly your SRO at that point, okay? So if it is a very substantive threat, the principal's also going to notify the superintendent, and if possible, your DPP, your CDW, those kind of folks can get involved too. I know Jessica and I just had one not too long ago. It's always in the evening, isn't it? Always. Was it a Friday too? Usually it's Friday in the evening.
Yeah, and about, was it 2:30?
Yeah, it's always Friday at 2:30, always. And then by 5:30, we had the CDW and the police and a translator, and yeah, all kinds of fun folks hanging out with us. So, yeah, if it gets to the point where we need to bring in the cavalry's pretty good around here about coming. I'll give them that. I'll give them that. Okay, so, all right. So first off, I kind of want you to talk to your team a little bit. Now that we know kind of the difference between a threat that wasn't severe, what were the outcomes of some of the threats that you know about that have happened at your school? Think about one that was transient. Maybe what kind of happened? Were there any, I still can't think of that word, Kathy. Did the kid have to make amends of some sort? Were there any disciplinary issues? Then think of one that maybe was a bit more serious. What happened because of that one? Okay? You'll just talk for a few minutes amongst yourselves.
I think we've only had one serious,
I have not.
and it wasn't very serious.
I think so.
We had
Is it a field or?
However, was it CR?
We had one this morning, it was, and I had about 4 last week that wasn't, but 2, I hope that was pretty severe.
I think it's CR.
We just did one on Friday.
I think it was CR that was serious.
What, that was serious?
Yeah, he does have lots of help.
He's gonna be in solutions.
Yeah.
For the rest of the year.
The rest of the year, yeah. He's been there.
So is that like your alternative school stuff? What do you?
No, we don't have classes anymore. They are
I
coming
guess
up with
it's-
solutions.
But it's still the same difference. Just a different word.
It's a cross. Alternative in IFS.
But yeah.
Yeah, we don't have like the alternative either, so. But yeah, he had a lot of mental health.
Issues.
I think he was suspended.
He was. Yeah, that was the one that
And now he's down.
Angela Wilkes came in.
I think we've done several on
Sent him to the rec. Yeah. Immediately after, yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
When there's nobody there watching it. We need some more mental places, mental hospitals.
We do.
There's not. We need
There's not that.
No,
No.
because if not, they're the ones that end up on the street. They're crazy.
Yeah, you're right. I know you just had this one case last week.
He did, yeah, from earlier.
Yeah, he did.
Feels like a month ago.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Oh my God.
We got one that's crazy. He sees people.
Oh,
no.
They're in the ceiling watching me go back.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no.
I mean, he's making something coming. It's just like, it's bad.
I'm guessing he's listening.
No, he's with, she's in, behavior. He's with, Gilbert also.
So what do you have, like, you'll have behavior rooms and alternative high school and like ISS or?
We don't have an ISS.
Okay, just have a behavior.
They're either in the behavior room or they're in the alternative.
Okay.
So if it's something like for the rest of the day, normally they go to the behavior room. But you have to watch because of the group that's already in there. All those people. You can't put some people, you can't put other people in.
I don't know. People are gonna get.
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Go ahead and send them a list of kids.
We did do one Friday, didn't we?
Yeah, the one that called.
Yeah, it was made at,
This happened outside
yeah. Threat was brought to our attention
during school.
during school.
I hate social media, just throwing that out there. I hate social media. I hate kids having cell phones too.
Yeah. So phones are terrible.
They're not responsible enough to have it. Just saying.
Yeah.
Personal opinion, but
They can't handle it. Yeah.
heck, some adults can.
They now, then they think that they type something in.
I don't know. I know.
You take it away. You take it away, you don't type it in. It's there.
It's there forever.
It's there, yeah, you gotta take it back.
Once you put it out there, it's open.
Yeah, and the situation Friday was.
It was. Girls, yeah, drama, it's great.
Well, y'all get them straight before they come to me.
I think.
Y'all got 2 more years to get them straight.
All right, guys, is everybody about finished? Yeah. Okay. I might have a couple of folks share. What is a situation that's happened at your school where it was maybe a transient risk? What kind of happened? Again, no names, just the vague details.
Well, I mean, we had one that there was 2 boys playing and they were reenacting a video game that they played and making finger
guns, yeah.
I'm saying player eliminated. It was obvious they're playing, but 2 girls saw it and took it as they were gonna kill somebody. And, you know, they were going around pointing at different people in there playing and they took it as a threat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what was the resolution for that?
It was just transient. I mean, just we talked to parents and everyone involved and then principals.
One of the kids just getting ready to kill you. And I'm like, I'm guilty of doing that sometimes, especially my husband. I'm gonna kill you. But
You have that a lot.
when you get out of the film, I don't really want to hurt him. It just made me mad. That kind of stuff happens all the time, especially in the little ones.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
It
We
does.
get a lot of that, a lot of
Mhm.
expressions, a lot of, like you said, playing. A lot of times those are the kiddos that you'll ask them, what was going on? They have no clue what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
What are you talking about? Like, what happened at lunch?
We had one saying, but he was it a video game or a movie? Steal your soul.
I'm gonna kill you and steal your soul. And he would do this to a chest.
I mean, he had no idea that anything was
And he
wrong.
really didn't know.
It was just something he'd say and thought he was playing.
Absolutely.
And we talked about, just saying it's very inappropriate. Inappropriate gestures, verbal, all of this kind of stuff.
We do a lot of that at the elementary level,
Yes.
probably more so than you guys do. Taking it more as like a teaching opportunity than an actual real, maybe disciplinary issue. An opportunity to teach our kiddos there are things that we don't say and we don't repeat and we don't do while we're at school. Any of my secondary folks have maybe one that was transient or one they could share?
Last week I had a girl come in my office, first thing, I'm so mad I'm gonna fight. And I was like, okay, like, and so we kind of asked her some questions, and it was like, not any really person she was mad at, or like, she was just really angry, and she felt like if somebody pushed her button, she was likely to get into a fight. But she didn't have like a real threat to fight a certain person or anything like that.
Yeah. It's more of an expression and a
Yeah.
way to express her anger. Anybody else want to share one that was maybe transient? They know of it, they're doing.
I had one a couple weeks ago, and a little girl said, I think she was gonna hit the teacher or do something to the teacher, but she was just frustrated with her work and she wanted to get out of the classroom because it was really difficult. So she didn't really want to hurt the teacher. She just wanted to get out of the assignment that they were completing.
A way to escape.
Yeah.
We've done some threat assessments on kids singing the wrong words to Jingle Bells. We've done some threat assessments on a picture. My favorite was a picture of a little boy that was shooting Santa Claus because he was coming down his chimney and he wasn't invited. But yeah, so I mean, we have had some things reported that have, obviously not been real threats where there's intent. But it is good that, we go ahead and talk with those kiddos. You may not have talked to her. She not felt comfortable enough to come up to you and tell you that. And she maybe really could have had something happen later on the day if things continued not to go that way. What about maybe a threat or something at your school that was a little bit more on the serious side? Who can share something about that?
Well, I will say, I'm not at the middle school or high school. My son is a senior at the high school. And when the threats occurred this year there, he blew up my phone, texted me, Mom, please get me out, because he was scared. And fortunate enough, Dreama was in my building. I said, look, my son is texting me. Can you tell me that he's safe? And she said, yes, they're zeroing in on the person. It's perfectly safe at school. And felt guilty, but I texted my son back and I said, you're fine. They know who's doing it. They're on the way to him. You're okay. But still, coming from a parent's point of view, it concerned me.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. My daughter was at the middle school then too, and I feel comfortable telling you all that she was actually sobbing in Cindy Bryant's shoulder because she was so worked up about it.
Yeah.
And they were on the phone with me out in the hallway. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. That kind of thing affects our kiddos.
Well, and just the Snapchat, how they're using that, they use that as a tool in Britain.
Sorry, same over here.
That's
Yes.
most of ours.
Most
Like,
of
it's
ours.
social media or texting.
And the more indirect it is, the easier it is for kids to do. It's not like telling somebody in their face, I'm gonna do this, it's typing a few letters into something that you just see and you think nobody else is gonna pay any attention to it. Right.
Yeah.
The one I was telling you about with Jessica and having all the fun people at the school, we had a kiddo who never been on anybody's radar, didn't really know much about, and she expressed a desire to want to hurt her big sister. And
Started out with herself.
yeah,
A friend came and told us about that, and then once we started talking to her, it came out that she had a plan to kill her sister. And then after we got the translator, talked to Mom already knew this. She'd evidently been hiding knives in the couch to try to kill her sister. And Mom had already taken her to New Vista, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But an appointment, they hadn't really got actual therapy yet. They had just done an assessment there, and that was it at that point.
Yeah, so we had the big guns there, the police and the CEW. So, I mean, that is one where, we had to bring in quite a few folks.
She is getting mental health therapy now. And her little sister, I talk to her every day, and she seems to be doing much better to me. But her little sister even came to me the other day and told me, she said she was doing so much better. So that gives me even more hope.
Absolutely. So again, I mean, it wasn't like this kid got sent anywhere, but she definitely needed some support, some things put in place. Again, she was taken somewhere and assessed, but cleared and came back and was very heavily monitored.
Story that she tells us.
Yeah.
And evidently so did the mom, because she didn't tell them the stuff that couldn't have, I wouldn't imagine. But
And that is kind of the danger in some of this stuff. They will tell you one thing and then go somewhere and tell you something completely different. And then here they show up the next day and you're like, but absolutely. Anybody else want to share? No? All right. Okay. All right, so like we said, there are several phases, beginning with transient, up through substantive, of threats. I think you all probably are sick of hearing those two words by this point. Obviously, like we talked, the lowest level one you're going to get are the kiddos that are using figures of speech. Like Jessica said, we all use them at some point. We all might say, Jessica, I won't kill you for using my last pencil. Or, something like that. We all joke. We all say things like that, obviously. But for the most part, there isn't any real intent to harm anybody. One of the things we did this last time that really people were super interested in is I don't want you all to think that there should not be some sort of disciplinary follow-up if you're doing a threat assessment. There absolutely should. Like Chris said, if a kid calls in a bomb threat, there absolutely should be consequences. Our part is just to make sure that our kiddos are safe before we get to that stage, to where we get to that part. Okay. Okay. All right. So like I said, that lovely decision-making tree, we just follow it. All right. If step one doesn't, step one's not going to resolve our problem. But if step two doesn't, we just keep going. This board doesn't like me.
I like the third one. Almost.
Well, am I supposed to swipe or tap?
See if there's two arrows to, oh, there you go.
Oh, okay. All right. So get out your lovely big packet. Okay. So this is absolutely just copied from step one. So the very first step, we're going to evaluate the threat. Okay. We're going to obtain a detailed account of the threat. Usually that's done by interviewing the person who made the threat. Maybe the victim, if they did a direct threat and they stated it directly to their intended victim, or other witnesses. Like if they did not make a direct threat, it was indirect and somebody else heard it and reported, you could talk to them. Okay. So if you are on step one, you are most likely going to be doing the following 6 pages. So let's take a quick look at those. Okay. All right. So the first page right after that is the threat report. And this is going to be the very first thing that gets filled out. You're going to want to know who is reporting the threat. If it's kid, staff person, parent, whoever. So you're going to fill that part in. And underneath it is a section for information that you might already know about this kiddo, right? Are you going to know everything on there? Maybe want to take the time to look at everything, not right then? Maybe not. But it might be handy for you to know. Is this a kid that has had some behavior issues in the past? If you're looking under the behavior tab in IC, are you seeing things? Has it been just a hard year? Do they have a history of maybe office referrals? You probably are going to want to know if the kid is a special education student or not. Maybe as far as like their academic records, that might not be important at the time. We always like to look and check too, is our kiddo in some sort of outside counseling already? Okay, so each school for the most part, I think, has a binder of some sort. I know our elementary schools do. How do you all do that? You have a binder? Jessica has a binder. Bettina, you all have. Christy has all that stuff. Christy has it.
She probably has it.
Yeah, Christy has a binder. All right, so everybody has a binder that we keep our releases in, and usually the sign-in sheets for our outside agencies that come in, and usually DCBS has a tab too, maybe that they sign when they come in. So that's just a good reference so that we know who's receiving services, because sometimes we do have to get those counselors or those therapists involved too. And if we kind of go ahead and look and say, oh, they're already receiving services from this person, we can kind of have that in the back of our head that maybe if we need extra help to maybe bring in them also. So it's really important on here when it's got the summary of the incident or threat, if you could be as specific as possible about the actual wording of the threat. What exactly did the kid say? You know, if it's a picture, hang on to it, right? So make sure you're trying to be as specific as possible. Okay. All right. Flip for me. All right. So the first page after that is the actual interview that you would do with the student who is the subject of the threat assessment. Okay. So for the most part, these are pretty much open-ended, common sense type questions that you know would make sense to ask, right? A lot of times I just start with a discussion with the kiddo and then like kind of have this over to the back of me and like write down things on the back, because I don't want to be asking like, what are you doing today? And then like copying it down. I mean, you don't want the kid to feel necessarily like they're being interrogated, right? You're trying to get them to talk to you. So you're wanting to try to make it as much as kind of a conversation as you can. Okay. So you are going to ask the kiddo, do they know why? You know why I want to talk to you today? A lot of times, if it's something serious, they know. Yeah, I know what it was. Well, what was it? I said this at lunch. Most of the time, they're going to be pretty honest with you. They're pretty upfront. Don't you guys think, folks that do it? Most of the time, they know. Cindy's laughing. Why are you laughing?
Yes.
Absolutely. We will have kids that tell stories. Or claim they don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times though on those we can kind of find out what happened because we have cameras places and witnesses and yes, and things like that. But for the most part, I think our kids usually are fairly honest about this. I think a lot of times they do know. And then like I said, we do have sometimes those clueless kids that we're joking around and they have no idea what's going on. Like, oh, well, I said that and I didn't even think about it. We want to try to get exactly at what the kiddo was meaning. What exactly did you mean by that? Did you mean I'm going to kill you? Or did you mean like I'm joking, I'm aggravated at you? Like, what is your actual intent? All right. We try to get like at their sense of empathy. Well, how do you think they felt when you said that to them? You know, if they said, I don't know how they felt. Well, how would you feel if someone says this to you? Okay. Again, we're getting at intent. You know, were you trying to scare them? Were you trying to intimidate? The reason. Okay. Well, why would you say that to them? You know, is there a beef? Is there some history? What's been going on? What has led up to this? Was it spontaneous and impulsive, or has this something that's been stewing for a while and you just reached your point and this is what's happened? Okay. And what are you going to do now? Okay. So you said this, so this is what's happened. This is what are you going to do now? Are we still having feelings like that? Is this something you still want to do? Because a lot of times we say a lot of things in the heat of the moment, right? We say a lot of things. We're aggravated, or we're mad, or we're frustrated. And then by the time that we've got a second or two to calm down or cool off or think about it, we're in a different place, right? And that's the same with our kiddos. They could have really meant that they wanted to tear somebody's head off 5 minutes ago. But now that we've had a minute to sit down at the counselor's office and we're not faced with that kiddo and we're in a calm place, we may have thought, not really what I wanted to do. I was really upset. Okay. So what are their feelings now? We get that they were angry then. What are we feeling now? What is our intention now? Okay. All right. Anybody want to add anything? My folks have done this. Okay. When I have kiddos that have done a threat with a weapon, I always try to make sure that in that first little bit, I ask them about their access to weapons. That's technically not in there until later, but I want to know. I want to know right now. What do you have access to? Well, you said you wanted to do this with this. Is that something you can do? Do you have access to a gun? Do you have access to a knife? Okay. So that's not in there, but that's something I always try to check on if the kid has mentioned a weapon right there at the beginning. Okay. Any questions? Like I said, it's a super short form. It pretty much flows just like you would in a normal conversation you were having with the kids that's having issues anyway. You don't necessarily have to have this right in front of you when you're talking with the kiddo. It just kind of gives you a guideline to follow. No questions? All right. So the next page is pretty much a duplicate of that. It's almost the exact same thing, only this is the interview form that you would use with the target or witness. Okay. So this is either the intended victim or the kiddo or someone who saw it or heard whatever happened. Okay. So this comes in handy when you're like Sam and your kids will lie to you. Well, I have a few friends that say that this is what happened, not this. So, sometimes you may have to go back and, interview the two kids that are sitting beside them at lunch, or who else was in that group on the playground, or who else was standing beside whoever's locker when all this stuff was going on. So sometimes if it's just between two kiddos, you may not need to. But two, this is the time for us to kind of reassure maybe that target of, hey, we're doing something. A lot of times we don't talk to the kiddo that ends up being the target. We're all wrapped up in, making sure we've got our eyes on this kid. Absolutely, somebody needs to have our eyes on the kid that's made the threat. But we need to check too on that kiddo that has been the target to make sure that they feel, hey, they're doing something to make sure that I feel safe. Like they want to check on how my feelings. Well, yeah, I could see how that would scare me too if somebody said that to me. I could understand why you'd be upset. Right? So kind of validating some of those feelings that they might have. Has anybody ever done one of the target interviews on a kiddo? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do they usually act like they appreciate the?
Yeah, I think they do. They just.
Yeah.
I think they feel like they're able to tell their side.
Mm-hmm.
The story.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Sometimes the witnesses, especially when you get little ones, they're terrified. So obviously, I'm not the person they send you to when you're in trouble, I promise. Okay. But we just need to know what happens, and we want you to be honest, and we will make sure everybody stays safe. All my kiddos have heard the stay safe at school lessons so many times, it's not even funny. But yeah, that's what we talk about. We're just trying to make sure everybody's safe. So I just wondered what you heard. What happened? Okay. All right. So the next form, I love forms. There's so many of them. All right. Is key observations. Well, this is kind of how to help you narrow down whether or not this is going to be a substantive or a transient threat. All right. So it asks you yes or no questions. Is this threat benign? Were they feeling angry? You just kind of go down through the list and check whether or not it applies. It kind of gives you a nice little guide to see whether or not it might be more serious or not. I don't know about you all, but I like checklists like this because sometimes I second guess myself. And it's kind of nice to have something Back me up. I feel validated. It makes me feel good. All right. Okay. So once you have your information, you have your threat report, you have your interview with your threatener, and your interview with either your target, if you have one available, you may not, or witnesses. Then is the time to come back with the rest of your threat assessment team. This is the information we got. What do you think needs to happen? What do you think this threat could be categorized? Is this a transient? Is it substantive? If it's serious or very serious? So there is a part down here where you would put your threat classification. Can you think of a time when it would change? It's got a little section down there for change.
Maybe hear from another witness.
Yeah, maybe you get some more information, something happens. So, I mean, it's a possibility, okay? All right. So the next page kind of gives you a little guideline to see what kind of interventions might be needed for this kiddo. All right. How many of these things do they tick off? None of these things are good. All right. The more ticks, the worse it is. It's kind of like those lovely ACEs things we always talk about at the beginning of the year for trauma, right? The more checks on this, the worse it is, right? So we're talking about things. Is there a history of physical violence, criminal acts, preoccupation with violence, depression? Some of this stuff you're not going to know, and that's okay. Okay. But the more ticks a kiddo has on this, they need something. They need something. Okay. All right. And then the very last one, if you have a transient threat, is the threat response. So this is pretty much the what happened because of. Okay, so my threat was transient. Well, now what's going to happen? That one, threat response.
It starts on the same page that you were on.
Okay, I didn't see that at the bottom.
Oh, does
Okay,
it?
yeah,
Okay,
I
this
was
is my
looking-
old copy.
Okay,
from
because mine
like-
looked a little different, that's why I was.
I
okay.
apologize. I apologize. What if first ever messed up then? Okay. All right. So this kind of gives you a chance to document what happened. Okay. Well, maybe the threat was transient, but we are going to have the student number 4 do a student apology. He's going to write a letter to the kid saying he's sorry, or he's going to tell him he's sorry. And then maybe, I don't know, he has lunch detention or something, like check 20 and put lunch detention or something like that. So this is just a place for you to document the outcome of what happened because of the assessment. Now, of course, we don't like to document things in just one place in the school world. We like to document things in lots of places. So a lot of times this is also documented through IC in the behavior tab. So I don't know who does that in your buildings. Usually, like I do, the form and pass it along. So I don't know if you all do that. You all, for the most part, put in your own stuff, or
I put
We
it
just-
under counseling, but I've never put it under behavior.
never put it under behavior. A lot of times, like I know, like if the assistant principals will do, put it under there, they have to do like lunch detention, things like that. All right. Okay. All right. So most of the time, our threats are transient. What would you all say? Like 75%, 80%? I mean, a good chunk of the time. Most of our threats in there, right? The kid gets some sort of consequence. We resolve it. Usually they go back to being best buds for the next 2 days until something else happens and everybody's good. But if it doesn't stop there, okay, we are going to move along the lovely the tree. Okay. All right, so that's what we just talked about. Okay. All right, so we've done step 2. We have attempted to resolve the threat is transient. So we've decided that it is indeed no real intent to harm. It was either impulsive or it was meant out of fun. And so we can go to yes, the case is resolved as transient and add to the services as needed. So just because it's transient doesn't mean that a kid might not need, to hang out with the counselor some, talk some about things if they're angry. if they're mad, or if there are things that are going on and they have some issues. It might not mean that, it doesn't have to mean that they don't need like therapy services. I mean, that could be a window to talk to parents about getting any extra services the kids need. So for the most part, after that, we just kind of see what those kiddos might need. You know, kind of reassure them, kind of keep an eye on them. If step 2 does not resolve it, then you're going to respond to a substantive threat. So you're going to take precautions to protect the potential victims, okay? So we're still monitoring this kiddo the whole time, right? Somebody's got eyes on them the whole time. They're staying in an area where they can be seen. Somebody's with them. All right. We do need to warn intended victims and parents, and that's not a fun conversation to have with folks. Okay. We're going to get into duty to warn here in a little bit, but it's just exactly like duty to report. We're a duty to report state, meaning that we have to report any kind of abuse suspected. We are also a duty to warn state. Okay. We're going to look for ways to resolve the conflict, and only when appropriate, worry about disciplining the student, right? So we're trying to make sure everybody's safe right off the bat. If a kiddo is having a complete and utter meltdown, throwdown, is that the time to start lobbing the discipline issues at them? No. All right, we've got to worry about de-escalation and getting sure that everybody is safe. Okay? All right. So again, serious is a threat to hit, fight, beat up, whereas serious is kill, rape, or cause very serious injury with a weapon. All right. So maybe, what are some of the things that you would think would help resolve a serious substantive threat? If you got 2 guys that just cannot get along and look at each other in the same class, can you all think of anything you could do? Some things you could work out between them?
Sit them on opposite sides of the classroom.
Okay.
Worst case, you can change their classroom.
All right. Anything else? I mean, there's some things we can do, right? If we've got kiddos that are having issues, wanting to hit, fight, be in each other's faces and spaces, there are some things we can do as school staff to kind of monitor, separate those kiddos. Like Tina said, maybe we can change their classes, put them on opposite sides of the room, make sure they're not in small groups with each other. And sometimes that can kind of resolve that conflict, right? So there are some things that we can do before to kind of help resolve some of those serious ones. Again, if the kiddo says, I want to fight everybody all the time, I just feel mad all the time, we can definitely look at some additional services to get that kiddo to help them. Okay, so if we move on from that, we're going to look at possibly filling out some of the rest of the packet. So where we left off in our lovely packet was with the bottom part under our threat response is where it says case plan or safety plan. Now, a lot of your school counselors are ones that are in charge of doing safety plans with kiddos, and I think they're just good for any kiddo, really. Everybody likes a plan, right? Or is it just me that likes lists and things like that? I like a plan. Let's make a plan. Most of our kiddos like plans too, I think. They like to know, okay, if this happens, this is what I'm going to do. So if we've got a kiddo that has issues with another kid in a class, or maybe they do have conflict, or there's some things going on, I think it's absolutely appropriate to safety plan with this kiddo. Okay, if Johnny gets on your nerves a lot in second period and you feel like you need a break, let's take a time out. Let's go for a walk. Talk to the teacher. These are the things you can do before we let it escalate to the point where we want to fight or we want to get physical with other kiddos. Okay? All right. So that's where you would stick that part. All right. Then after that, you have what pretty much the rest of the packet is, and that's the mental health assessment. And that's the part that if it gets to the point where it is substantive, that it would look at your counselor completing with your kiddo. Okay? So this could be our school counselor, this could be our mental health staff, or this could possibly be their school, their outside therapist, if you want to call them in to see if they're willing to do it. Have you all ever had an outside agency be willing to come in and do these for your kiddos?
I think there's been some Zoom.
Have there been some Zoom sessions? Okay. A lot of times they'll tell you to go ahead, at least ones I have. Annie?
When you said if there's any like outside agencies who can take this, do you mean like they do their own assessment, or are we supposed to give them this and they fill this out?
They can do this or they can do theirs, either one.
They do the one I have had at the high school in the past. I had a student that was such a threat that we could not keep her in the building. And so we had to say, you know, Karen, you've got to come pick her up. And then we required an outside assessment. So they're having those cases where you could not even get them in the building long enough to do an assessment, that it had to be somebody else.
Yeah.
So if it's an outside visit, do they typically send a copy of the assessment back with them?
Do they?
They do.
Yes.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes we just get a paper saying that they have been assessed and they
We
were.
have required,
Yeah.
that usually the ones I've been involved with, the parent, you know, had the parent sign a release and then send us the assessment.
See, that's the kicker. You gotta make sure you've got those releases signed before they leave. But yeah. If a kiddo will not cooperate with you, like we were talking about those kiddos that would not cooperate, you and our staff can't do this, then they absolutely have to be sent somewhere else for this to happen.
Yes, we've had a couple now after we talked that we've had.
Yeah.
Olaf did one and then the Ridge did the other. So yeah, before they came back to school.
All right. So this is a huge chunk of what's in here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and talk about the rest of what's in here. There is also too a parent and guardian interview. So it just talks about what kind of issues they may have noticed at home with their kiddo. And I know either there's two kinds of parents. There's one that wants to tell you all the things, and then you have the parents that tell you no the things. It's usually one extreme or another. So again, just a guide if you call parents and you want to get information on like their behaviors at home, things that are going on, that kind of thing. The next chunk in here is a teacher or staff interview. So again, this is just to kind of go behind, does the teacher have issues? Like what kind of behaviors are they seeing? Are there concerns? I honestly have never used either the parent one or this one personally as an outline. I could see using the parent one more, but the teacher one I think is pretty formal for what we usually do when I talk to my teachers about kiddos that I'm seeing. But it's absolutely in there for you to use if you want to. Okay.
So do these need to be completed in like a serious? Or just if you need that information?
Just if you need it.
Okay.
Okay. Absolutely. All right. And so the last couple pages in here are a behavior intervention plan. And I know that for the most part, our behavior intervention plans are usually part of our special education paperwork. So that's not usually something that we take care of or we do.
But there are lots of kids that have behavior intervention plans.
Absolutely.
That are not special ed.
Absolutely.
Because if they're in RTI, like tier 2, they probably have a bit. Because we're trying to prevent a referral from special ed.
Yeah. So those are all in the PLP tab under documents under PLP. So if you've got a kiddo that has one of these, I know a couple of our counseling staff have been asked to write a couple of these here in the last little bit too. So this is just one form to use. I don't think this is the form. Like I think you could use whatever you like. I know Dr. Rigsby gave me a really nice one from Waynesburg that she uses, and it's really awesome, really thorough. So I don't think you have to use this one, but it is kind of a template there if you want to. Okay. I'm going to screen out. It's down. What am I doing wrong, Tracy? You had the mojo earlier.
Click at the bottom and see if the arrows will come up.
Ah, oh, wrong way. Okay. All right, so step 4, again, we're just going right down the decision-making tree, is to conduct a safety evaluation for very serious substantive threats. So, like I said, if we were able to resolve some of those issues before, we wouldn't continue on, but this is the part where we get to those forms that we just talked about. So this is where we would be screening the kiddo with that mental health assessment, trying to see if there's any like maybe red flags that we didn't see before, anything that we might have missed that we can get some help for. This is also maybe this is also the part where we need to think about involving our law enforcement folks. So usually it's either going to be the principals or the assistant principal that's going to be contacting maybe our RSO. Hey, I've got this going on. I need some help. Maybe our CDW even might be in at that point. Okay. We obviously want to look at making sure that we have some sort of safety plan in place that's going to reduce the risk of anything happening. And also, this is probably the point where if your kiddo is a kiddo who is receiving special ed services, our special ed leads are really good to bring in at this point because they have a lot of information on their kiddos. They know exactly what their disabilities might be, if it plays a part in what's going on. And also, like, they really know a lot about what's going on usually at home with a lot of their kiddos. All right. So again, that's things you might want to consider completing as part of that. Oops. All right. So step 5, very bottom, is to implement and monitor the safety plan. So you're going to document, you're going to maintain contact with the kiddo, and you're going to monitor whether your plan is working and revise it as needed. Okay. So that is the plan that your team has come up with for your kiddo, how to address the situation, the conflicts, that kind of thing. All right. So the main thing is, again, we just want to make sure that we're preventing any act of violence from being carried out. Okay. Okay. All right. There are some factors to consider when we talk about substantive threats. We need to consider the age of the student. If Bobby, who's in kindergarten, tells you he's going to run over you with his car, that's probably not going to happen, right? The capability of the student to carry out the threat, whether the student has a disciplinary history, the credibility of the student and the willingness to acknowledge their behavior, the credibility of the witnesses. Sometimes we have the lovely 3-way love triangles that like to tell on each other, and I'm looking at them because it's always middle school. But you know, we do kind of have to take into consideration, like Karen said, or 2 little boys playing video games with their fingers. Like, we have to kind of think about what's going on, what's the context, what are those kids really thinking. But when in doubt, we're always going to treat a threat as a substantive threat. All right, so we do have kids that do have to be cleared by outside agencies. Maybe they are taken somewhere to get evaluated. What happens then? Okay, so like Tracy said, usually we have an assessment that they will complete to say whether or not they feel that it is safe for the child to return to school or not. We do require kiddos to come back with some sort of documentation of that. So whether that's just a letter stating they have been seen and then that they are cleared to return to school on this date, usually they'll bring that in, and we usually keep that up front. When that kiddo comes back, one of the first things we want to do is we want to meet with that student. We want to kind of safety plan with them. Okay, so we're back at school. This is what happened when we were at school last time. You know, what can we do different? What can we change? You know, what's going to be our plan? I know in the past the high school had a form for that. I don't know if you all still do or not. I think that was last year. They said they had one, so I don't know if you all still using it or not. You might want to consider a restorative justice approach that lets kids make amends for their actions. You know, maybe they said something really horrible and now it's not really substantive. Maybe they feel remorse for it and they want to make some sort of apology to the other person. You want to make sure that somebody's monitoring these kiddos. And just like Chris said earlier, developing a positive and trusting relationship with kiddos is absolutely critical. You know, you don't want these kids to feel more ostracized when they come back. You know, everybody's mad at me. Everybody hates me. I said this, I did this. Well, yeah, you made a mistake, but you know, we're still going to support you. We're still going to offer you whatever services we can. You know, we don't want them to feel like they're coming back to a situation that's just as hopeless as they may have felt when they made whatever statement or gesture that they made.
I keep those reentry forms that they bring back to me in the purple folder with the threat assessment. Is that not?
I think that's fine. I think that's fine. Yeah. We're going to get to the purple folder in just a second. But a lot of times it's kind of nice to have like a little reentry plan. Again, I like plans and lists and all that kind of lovely stuff. So this is one that Tracy found earlier. I just made copies of it. It's definitely not one that you have to use, but it's kind of a little sample of some things that you would probably want as part of your reentry plan, right? You're going to safety plan with our student where, you know, if this happens again, or you start to have these feelings, here's some things you can do. Here are some options. Obviously, you're going to kind of talk to your teachers and let them know, hey, this kiddo is coming back to your room today. You know, if this happens, or if they seem empty, or they need a break, you know, let somebody know. Somebody can kind of help. Who's going to be checking in and monitoring with that kid? Again, we're trying to build positive relationships. We're trying to make them feel like they've got a person. You know, who's going to be checking in with them, even if it's just tapping on the shoulder, like, hey, how's it going? How's the day going so far? It's been okay. All right, if there's going to be some changes to their routine or schedule, all right, like I said, sometimes we can change seating, we can kind of move some things around, see if that can help. Staff might be used as a resource, okay? At the end of each block, you're going to check in with Miss Jessica to see how it's going, if everything's all right, something like that. Supports that the student is getting or can access. So maybe we've had a kiddo come back and we've decided that maybe they could use a fidget or a calm down kit or something like that. What have we got that we can offer them? We're going to put that as part of our plan to use. Also interventions. So if the kiddo is getting counseling or part of the group, you know, what kind of supports do they have as far as that also? All right, so the scary question is always, if the student is threatened, should I contact the parent? And it is yes. If the student is threatened, is the target of the threat, we are required to inform the parent. Usually that is a call that the principal makes. It's never a fun one. But we do have to let that parent and that student know that yes, this happened. You can tell them that we are addressing the situation, concerns that they may have. You look like you wanted to talk.
I do want to say something. You said usually a principal makes that call, but if a student directly tells you that they're going to hurt somebody else, by law, you have to report that to the parent or to the intended victim. That is your responsibility if they tell you that. If they can say they're going to hurt a staff member, if they're going to hurt, you tell that staff member. If they're going to hurt a kid, then you call that kid's parents. If they tell you that, it's by law, it's your responsibility. So just leave it up to a principal because you will be liable.
You beat me to it. All right, and so that comes from court case from the 70s. Tarasoff versus the Regents of the University of California. Basically, there was a college student who told his therapist he was going to kill this woman because she didn't want to be with him. And the therapist contacts the police who interview him and let him go because he says he's kidding, right? And then several months later, he actually follows through and kills the college student, and he's found guilty of murder. The family sues the university, the police department, and the therapist. It goes to the Supreme Court, and the university and the police are found to have governmental immunity, but the therapist is found liable for failing to warn. Okay, so it's called duty to warn or duty to protect. In many cases in other states, they support duty to break confidentiality, to take action to protect potential victims of violence. And Kentucky is a duty to warn state. So the therapist was found personally liable for not having warned Tarasoff herself of the possibility of harm to her. So everybody else kind of was covered, but the therapist was found liable for that. All right, so what can you disclose in an emergency situation? So this is straight off the EdGov website. In an emergency, FERPA permits school officials to disclose without consent education records, including personal identifiable information from those records to protect the health or safety of students or other individuals. Anything else you want to add, Tracy? No. All right, so our EC kiddos, most of our EC kiddos have a higher grade assessment referral rate than a lot of our other groups of kiddos. In the Virginia, during one of the studies they looked at, about 35% of their referrals were from EC kiddos. We have lots of EC kiddos with serious emotional disturbances and ADHD. And a lot of those conditions can precipitate frustration, anger, and impulsivity. I know you all know this. A lot of these threats are made out of being impulsive, moments of anger. We've got a lot of kiddos that have issues with those kind of things. All right. Also, it's important to note that our EC kiddos can be suspended, but if they accrue more than 10 days of suspension in the school year, it's considered a change of placement. All right. So we keep suspending them for threats. We're actually in violation of what we need to be doing, and it's considered a change of placement. So I know we all get super frustrated when we have kids that are misbehaving and doing, and we're trying to do things. But the best thing that we can do is just try to gather as much data as we possibly can. What interventions are we using? How are we trying to help? What's working? What's not working? How many times have we tried it? What have we done? Just trying to gather as much information as we can about the outcomes. And our EC leads are absolutely wonderful to work with. And I'm serious. They're fabulous about knowing their kids and trying to help us out any way they can on getting them what they need. Anybody got any questions about any of the paperwork or any of that stuff?
I just walked in late, or walked out and back in, but just to comment on what you talked about at the beginning and then talking about the EC kids. You know, in the beginning you talked about, there's no real kid that you can target. It can be the good kid, it can be the EC kid. And then about how sometimes we look at those kids and go, well, that's a good kid. So that may be why those kids don't get those referrals as compared to the others.
It could be, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a really good point. Any other comments? Y'all are being too quiet. No questions on the forms, what to do? You think you'd be comfortable if you needed to do one? Okay.
So we're actually, in the case that, like we were talking earlier about the kids playing guns.
Yeah.
And they were playing with each other and target eliminated, whatever. The little girls that thought that it was a threatening behavior, even though it wasn't made toward them. So do you call their parents?
No, I mean, they're not the intended victim.
But they felt like they were.
They felt like they were. I would just talk to them.
If the student felt like somebody threatened them, I would always call a parent and say, you know, your student reported this today, but we did a threat assessment or we handled it and determined, you know, I would let the parents know because they're going to go home and tell the parents.
Right.
This little boy did this to me today. You should tell the parent first.
But if we have one instance, this little boy walks up to them, they were playing on the playground, and he says, "I'm going to kill you and steal your soul." Both kids knew that they were playing, but the teacher said that was threatening behavior.
We've had that a lot, that neither.
So do you call? See that?
But if you do a threat assessment and you deem it not to be a threat, then it's not really a threatening behavior. But if the other student perceives it to be a threat, then you'll want to let that parent know. But you don't give them the other kid's name because you decided it wasn't a threat. You're not doing a duty anymore. You're just saying, Susie came to me today. She was concerned we did an investigation. They were just playing it. Yeah. Two different things, but you don't ever want a kid to go home and say, Bobby threatened me on the playground and nobody did anything about it. It's better to come from you first.
So we should report transient and substantial just to be safe.
No,
Or not transient.
you don't have to report every transient, but if somebody thinks they've been threatened and they come to you and they're gonna go tell them and tell their parent, you best be calling the parent first. Because we don't want a parent at 6 o'clock at night be calling a principal and saying, why didn't I know my kid was threatened today, you know?
I just wanted to make sure stuff had some transient, like expressions out of anger, but the other kid didn't perceive it, they knew they were joking, and I didn't call the parent, but I just want to make sure.
It's just a case by case basis.
Now, we do call each time we pull in a kid.
Yes.
Just to, hey, I pulled Bobby today, you know, he made this remark on the playground. We just talked about how we don't say certain things at school. Usually parents, for the most part, are really easygoing about that kind of thing.
This is a topic with threat assessments, but I've had a ton of kids that's done inappropriate gestures, not threatening gestures, but inappropriate. You know what I'm getting at? Like, you know, well.
Spit it out.
Now we all know. The private parts type stuff, little kids. And I worked with Mr. Davis on it, and I've called the parents of the kids doing that, and we worked out plans to try to do some correction on their behavior. But do I need to call every single parent, like, the kid made these gestures? Okay, I did. I just got wondering on them. That's been a big blow up. I had 2 weeks of everybody being inappropriate. But
Maybe that needs to be your classroom guide.
yeah, that's what that's my next one. And I've been talking
Appropriate touch.
personal stuff. Yeah. Sorry.
No, you want to get that cleared up. No. Any other, I wish y'all would talk more, somebody talk. Other comments? Questions? All right, so we are actually gonna do a interview. Okay. Y'all are gonna love, actually you can let Tracy, Tracy's making me do it. All right, so I think we've got enough to do groups of 3. Let's see. Where'd Rachel go?
She had none.
Okay. All right. Do you just want to team up with them? Sure. Okay. All right. So we're gonna do a little bit of role play.
They already had 4, so pick one of these. Only have 3.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So the whole synopsis of this is that you had 2 students report to a teacher that a student in the cafeteria said he's going to become a serial killer. And the students are worried that he plans to attack on the school. You pull the student out of class and interview him in your office. So, do we ever do an assessment alone? No. No. All right. So there's going to be at least 2 of you conducting the assessment. Okay. So my first question is, who wants to volunteer to be a kid? You're such a good sport. Who wants to volunteer? All right, so this is your script.
Yeah.
Script.
Always.
Good for you.
I need an assessment, please.
She called It's front and back.
The other ones are strawberry.
Yeah, but you don't have to. That's good. Okay. Let's start right here. All right, so I'm gonna give my kids a minute to kind of look over what they're gonna say. My interviewees, if you want to take a minute, kind of look over the form. It's the exact one that we used. Okay. right, so obviously a threat report would already have been done at this point, so we don't have that part. So that would be the other students filling out exactly what they heard or what they saw going down in the cafeteria.
I'm Harley.
Harley.
What's up, Harley? I think Chloe's gonna need boxes. I think Chloe's gonna need boxes. These are my answers.
You're supposed to be answering Chloe. I was like, you know why you're here.
Yeah.
All right, so whenever you all are ready, go ahead and start.
Do you know why you're here?
I don't know what y'all talking about. Oh,
You don't know what we're talking about.
I didn't do anything wrong.
Chrissy's gonna ask a question. Oh, I get that.
Who ratted me out?
You're on.
You know why I wanna talk to you?
Not really. Of course, him is.
Of course, I don't know the incident, so this next question might,
I don't think we do. We're not supposed to.
well, it's just.
I don't know what's going on, but I mean,
If there's a
I'm
credit
just
set,
chit-chat with
you
you.
know, call out the next question.
Maybe we'll get to the, what
So
happened.
really, you don't.
April said everybody.
She wants to be.
There was something.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Maybe a serial killer.
They were picking on me and I didn't like it.
Okay, okay.
I didn't do anything wrong.
What did you, did she say this on the playground? Or- I can't remember.
They were cheering.
Cafeteria, okay.
And I didn't like it.
Okay, was there something
Nothing
you said
wrong.
in the cafeteria that-
I don't know what you're talking
Innocent.
about.
I don't mind.
That's not what I was saying.
No, I was just wondering, like,
That's about it.
And they were picking on you.
usually.
How old are you?
Don't know how I am. I play soccer.
You play
I
soccer?
play soccer. Well, I wouldn't even, I might have said something to my soccer friends. So what were they picking on? How did that happen?
No.
So, who brought you here?
What?
The bus.
Something about a serial killer. I don't remember.
I
I
pretended
don't
I was middle
remember
school.
exactly.
Because I had a middle schooler. I didn't know how you
It
answered.
was nothing bad. I just walked away after I said it.
But you said something about a serial killer?
Apparently.
So you.
So now you remember what you said?
That's all I said.
And then I walked away and didn't say anything else. Just left it at that.
Don't remember
So then
exact
somebody come up
words.
and talk to you or say anything to you, or the next thing you knew, you.
They must have
It
went
was
to-
nothing bad.
Okay, it's down here. Okay. Gotcha.
I just walked away after I said it.
So
So you didn't think that the other.
what brought that on?
Apparently I'm gonna be a serial killer.
No, I was just telling them what I wanted to be for Halloween.
I just really don't like them.
So,
They're kind of mean.
but serious
When
killers.
soccer
is
was done and
Yeah.
they make you.
Don't ask me questions that's not on my paper.
You normally talk.
It's just not nice.
Normally you talk about those.
Right.
So what did you mean when you said that?
So what did you mean when you said that?
I just really didn't like the way they were treating me, the way they were acting.
I didn't mean anything.
I didn't mean it. I just wanted them to know I didn't like what they were doing.
I didn't like the way they were treating me. I was mad. Everybody gets mad sometimes.
That's true.
What is that person's name? Who you talked to? Or who you said that's
Sally.
Sally? Okay.
So who did you say something about serial killer to?
Okay.
Before you walked away?
Feels about what you said.
I ain't got a clue.
Maybe.
I get a little bit worried.
You're all in on
Sometimes we do get caught up in like
Did you recognize?
giggles
maybe
with
so.
certain kids that were
Right,
doing,
so she
and
like
it's
a
like,
question or anything, like, didn't she roll
Apparently
her eyes?
not.
It made my feel. Okay, so I just.
it can get,
So do
keep it
you normally
straight.
talk to Sally?
What you
We're
do?
on the I try to talk to her.
Give her
but
students
they
that hard to do.
They don't talk to me.
We would like, we would.
How long have you known Sally?
I remember him.
That's all we did.
I need to get away from this boat. We have to go back down
You
there.
give it to me, but I keep getting on the.
No,
Okay.
you're right.
So how do you think that person felt? You said that to me.
I don't care how they feel. Maybe it'd be good.
Well, how would you feel if someone said that to you?
Maybe it'd be good if they were a little worried, you know? That's all I'm going to say.
Is it down further?
Well, when we get to the reasons I did say. So you say Sally and those kids, they don't talk to you after the soccer game?
No, they don't talk to me, make fun of me, trip me and laughed at me a few times. Soccer coach doesn't do anything. They think they're better.
So what's the reason that you said that you wanted to see it?
I just wanted
So
them
what
to
were these kids
leave me
picking on
alone.
you about?
I didn't mean that I didn't want to do anything, but I just wanted to know that I don't like
Oh,
them.
they've been picking on
I
me
guess
since
maybe
school started.
scare them a little bit, so they might think twice before they treat me, make fun of me, or other people.
So you think that scared you? Probably. Okay. And, so what are you gonna do now?
Well, I definitely won't say it again. I can tell them I'm sorry. I do. I don't want them to think that I'm gonna hurt them against each other. And I didn't mean to cause such a big fuss today. I just really got tired of being treated that way. It was just the first thing that came out of my mouth.
Okay, so.
So what is the reason you said that?
How
They've been picking on you.
I'll just walk away. Because I said this today and then just walked immediately away, so I could have just walked away without saying it.
Right. So you've had issues with them since the beginning of the school year?
Good job.
Well, listen. I'm used to interviewing different kids.
If y'all want to, they just feel everything or they don't say anything. There's no in-between.
So what are you
I
gonna
could
do
really
now?
see here one say.
I don't know. I'm sick and tired of putting up with them. When I stand up to myself. Oh,
Look at our phones on.
That's their cool.
Yes.
I'm
gonna come see you frequently.
No, you deal with boyfriend, girlfriend, use Snapchat.
Snapchat is the world's worst.
That's how they text now. I
And
realize.
it disappears.
Oh, really?
That's how they text. They don't text through text.
Don't forget on the back of your interview, you have the lovely little check
On
boxes
the back.
Yep.
On the back.
of the form to help you decide whether or not your
I'm gonna
student
stand up for
interview
myself.
was serious, more serious. Don't forget that part.
How serious I am.
All right, when you finish your interview, kind of meet together as a team. Decide if there was a threat, what kind of threat it was, and maybe kind of a plan.
Subject and mental threat.
Mm,
Well, she,
No, was she, no?
she said something about a serial killer.
That's what she said, something about serious.
So don't know.
I don't know.
Well, she seemed uncooperative.
Because she said she didn't do nothing wrong and, she kept saying confidence. And she would not give any,
Yeah. Subject has explanation. No.
no,
Subject makes
I
feeling.
mean, I appreciate it.
Yes.
yes,
Subject retracts threat or denies committing harm.
no.
Subject apology.
She did say.
No. Willing to resolve?
Church, and they don't talk to her after the game.
No. She didn't do anything wrong.
She didn't do anything wrong.
Continues to feel angry.
Express threat on work? No.
No,
Or don't know.
don't know. Yeah.
A specific plan, don't know.
Oh, yes, yes, she did.
Don't know.
With the suicide.
Yes. 12.
Yeah, let's just say.
Suicidal.
You said so. Probably.
Threatens involved use of a weapon. We really don't.
We don't know.
Exactly.
So it was, yeah, said exactly.
I'll just go.
We don't know anything.
No, but this one we do not. And you will not tell us. Right, because that's all you're going to say.
That's all I'm gonna say.
We're gonna do some more investigating. Let's get our witness in.
She's very uncooperative.
Yeah, very uncooperative.
I'm very middle school.
Get the witness. We're gonna get our witness in. She reminds me of the one that we did, the one that was not safe.
Well, she.
Yeah.
The
one we did today. The one we did this morning. He said, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. What'd you do that for? I don't know.
Well, so then they.
Was there a plan? I don't know.
And then
What? Serious. So it's just the what age is that kiddo, how we really have to know. Yeah, because like he was trying to be friends.
Yeah, that's what I
Right,
thought.
they're too young.
I am serious.
Well, yeah.
You are serious. I'm serious.
Family and,
Serious about this stuff.
like, is this a kid we're already concerned about? We should know the one that knew for us is. Yeah.
Tell her quit calling, we're in a meeting. She said, oh, yeah. I guess she didn't.
When you're out, you treat the threats as
Okay. No,
Well,
was a
not
bad
because
idea.
we ate it all.
You can swap out candy bowl with it. I don't like twisters. So you all can have all the twisters.
I like the full ones.
That's something every day. I can keep track of it.
Is everybody done? Yes? Okay. So each group had a different kiddo, same scenario, different kiddo. Who wants to go first and kind of tell a little bit about their kiddo, about their interview? Okay, Karen.
We had a student who, she was just being picked on, by a group of kids, over and over again. And in the cafeteria, she just said she wanted to be a serial killer. And she said that she said it just because it was the first thing coming out of her mouth, she was mad.
Okay.
And she didn't really mean it.
Okay. So what kind of, was that a threat?
No. It's just transient.
Yeah, it's transient, but it's still a threat,
Yeah,
right?
it was
She
a
did,
threat
yeah,
initially,
it
yes,
is.
yeah.
Yeah,
And then
it's
we did the
transient.
assessment, yeah.
Why is it transient?
She didn't have a plan. She didn't threaten anybody specifically. She was remorseful about it. She was offered to apologize.
Oh, good deal. What as a team did you decide would be kind of the plan for this kiddo?
Well, she really came up with the plan on her own, and she said that the next time something like that happened, that she would walk away, that something like that had already happened again, and that she did walk away, and
Yeah.
that she could have done that time too, but she didn't, and she was remorseful about saying that when she did.
Good deal.
And to put some
Awesome.
more support services in place for her, maybe to talk with the counselor routinely and see what's leading her to think that she wants to become a serial killer. I would say such a thing.
What about the issue with it because it's soccer, right? Being picked on at
We talked
soccer.
about that too, just to kind of investigate into the bullying and see what's going on with that.
Absolutely. Good deal. All right, who wants to go next?
Ours was similar, but he was in the cafeteria talking to, I guess, a group of other kids, and he said that he wanted to be a serial killer or an assassin. And so turns out he wanted to do that for Halloween. So it was not a threat, it was transient. And then at the end, he said that maybe he'll go with Spider-Man instead. So he kind of came up with his own resolution.
They don't like me very much, do you?
All right, my last group.
So Harley didn't know why she was here. She didn't do anything wrong. There was an argument in the cafeteria with some kids. They were picking on her. She said something about a serial killer, but didn't know exactly what. She walked away after. She said she didn't mean anything. She doesn't know who she said it to, but she doesn't care how they felt. Maybe it's good that they feel a little scared. She said she didn't know what she was going to do next. I'm sick and tired of being picked on, and she's going to stand up for herself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she just kept saying, that's all I'm gonna say.
That's all I'm going to
Okay.
say. She was very uncooperative.
Yes, very un-
Were you
yes.
good at being cooperative?
She was very
She
uncooperative.
was very.
Not me.
Yeah. She was-
All right, so what do we think about that one?
We think serious.
Just the thinking, I mean, we're definitely gonna have to find out
More
more
information.
information, interview some, witnesses,
Absolutely.
and see exactly how serious the threat this was.
Did you all think the interview flowed fairly easily though, given the questions on the form and how the questions kind of lead one after the other? Good deal. All right. So absolutely, that one kind of needs more information, right? Then we have one that's just kind of a mistaken, intent, and then one where someone said something impulsively out of anger. Right. All right. Good deal. All right. So this is a lovely purple folder. These usually live in our counselors' offices, or sometimes our assistant principals or principals will keep a hold of these. This is where all of these paperwork. So if you had done this interview on your student and you've done a threat assessment, this is where it would live when you're finished with it. So our paper folders are confidential. This is where risk assessments, threat assessments, if there were drawings, any documentation that might go with your assessments that you do, all of this stuff lives here. I like to stick referrals. If I do like a paper referral to a counseling agency, any of that information, it goes in here. We don't put that stuff in Cume folders just because we don't want it passed from district to district if a kiddo moves. We kind of like to keep that information. Usually those will move on with the kiddo in the district if they do go to a different school, or they do move from elementary to middle to high. Those get passed along. So if you have a kiddo that comes to you and they've got a purple folder, you know that there's been an assessment of some sort on them. So we do keep track of how many assessments we do on kiddos. We've got some that have quite a few things in their purple folder, and then some that don't. Okay. A lot of times when assessments are done, those are completed in the behavior tab of IC. Usually, I think most of the assistant principals or the principals do that. Mackenzie, you said that you put it under the counseling tab.
I do.
You do, Amy? Okay. So don't put any of that stuff in the students' cumulative records. They get kind of antsy about stuff you stick in there anyway. So releases, things like that, if they're like older or stuff, like all that stuff can kind of go in here.
So are we supposed to put it in the counselor down?
I don't know if that's, they've never told me to. Like, we just
Okay.
did it and then we filed it.
That's
So,
what we've done.
yeah.
Purple folder it goes to.
Yeah. Oh. Yes. Tracy, do you want them to document in IC each assessment that they do, or just to do the paperwork and file it in the purple folder?
I don't remember what we said before.
I can't remember either. I don't remember us saying that it had to be documented, but we just needed the paperwork filed.
Or should we just document where we contacted the parent?
For risk assessments, I would always document those in IC. For threat assessments, I think typically it becomes part of a principal's narrative and discipline.
That's what I was thinking too.
Now, it may not always turn out to be discipline, like, if the kid was gonna dress up for Halloween, it would just be a complete misunderstanding, but if it's an actual real type of threat, it's gonna be a discipline issue, and it's usually documented through the principal in ISD.
Any questions about purple folders? I see that Tracy brought in her stack. All right, so the lovely forms, that packet of forms that can be found in the lovely comprehensive school threat assessment guideline book. This is what Tracy has got ordered. The folks that sent me that they haven't found one. Also, I had a few people tell me that they had some at their schools that had this cover, but they were in white binders. So maybe if you don't exactly have the spiral bound one, if you kind of, like, I know you probably have a bazillion white binders like on shelves like everybody else does, maybe flip and see if you've got one that's got this cover. But I know that some people said that they left theirs at their previous school and they had one made up like that. Or down here at the Virginia, well, I can't talk now. If you Google Virginia Model Threat Assessment, this is the first website that comes up. This is a little title page about Dewey Cornell and kind of what he's working on right now. But there is a link on here to the PDF, which is exactly what you've got. It's a straight PDF right off of that website to have those forms where you can modify them and type in them if you want, or just print them out and have them for
Hold
later.
on, when you say modify, if you modify this, then it's not necessarily evidence-based. If you take away questions or you want to add a question or do something, then it's no longer evidence-based. For it to be an evidence-based procedure, you keep the forms the way they are. Okay.
All right. Anybody got any questions about anything? Thoughts? Opinions? Comments? Any?
I just want to clarify, because I may be doing something wrong. So if we do the assessment and it is a substantive threat, do we always do the extended mental health assessment, or would it be appropriate to refer to their outside provider?
If they want to go see their outside provider and their outside provider is willing to do that, I think that's fine.
Okay, because I've referred one in the past, but I didn't do the extended mental health referral or evaluation before, I just referred. So I'm just seeing if I need to make sure I do that before I refer.
I think that may depend on the kid. You may have to do that mental health assessment before you can ever really determine if it's a real threat, or it may be something more serious and you already know, and then somebody else, you're just going to refer it on.
Okay.
Anybody else?
What do we do if it has been a substantial threat and the kid comes back to school with no paperwork, nothing? It just shows up.
Usually we've kept that kid monitored and tried to get a hold of parents, and they're not allowed to be back at school. Like, somebody's got to come get them. Somebody's got to come pick them up. They're not allowed back unless we've got paperwork. So we keep eyes open for those kiddos when we think they're coming back. We try to be very, very clear when parents come pick up their kids. They cannot come back in this building or on school campus unless we have a document saying that they have been cleared by a mental health professional.
And lots of times it will be a suspension. I know lots of principals will go ahead and schedule an appointment. That day they come back, I need you to come meet with me at 9 o'clock with the student and bring your paperwork for.
And then you would be doing the reentry stuff anyway when they come back in at that point. But yes, if you do send your student to be cleared by a mental health professional, please, please, please make sure that you get that release of information signed so that if you need something from them, then you can communicate with them and they can give you what they've got on that kiddo. Because a lot of times they'll go ahead and safety plan, or even you don't want the kid to have 3 different safety plans. Which one are they following? What are they doing? I mean, you want to try to make it as easy on them and you as possible. So yeah, those releases are important.
Hey, April, when this, like, say the students have been suspended, whether it's transient or sick, do they still need to do the reentry plan, or only the serious ones?
I think it would depend on the case, wouldn't it,
The case.
Tracy?
I think it would depend on the case, and I think if it's transient, you probably don't need it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that is, you determined it wasn't a real threat
Okay.
Right.
necessarily, but if it's the other type, probably definitely need some type of plan.
Okay.
If it was an anger out of issue, then maybe you would want to be like, you know, how are we gonna deal with this if you get angry again,
Okay.
or that kind of thing, but. Anything else? Yep, that's it. All right, that's all I got. That's all I got, unless Tracy has.